Hello, my name is Mark Handler, and I'm speaking to you today on behalf of the Converus Corporation about something called multiple hurdles and successive hurdles in the credibility assessment process. I recently presented on this topic at the 2016 annual service provider meeting that Converus held in Las Vegas, Nevada in January this year. And a couple folks there asked me if I could take some time and prepare a short video lecture on this just to help people kind of think this through, because some of the concepts can be esoteric and maybe abstract at times, and so having a video to go back to and watch a couple times maybe helps you better wrap your head around it. So let's take a look at these concepts and see if I can help us make heads and tails of it, and hopefully I'll leave you better than I found you. A small disclaimer here, the material I present is not necessarily reflective or does not necessarily reflect the opinions of Hans, Handler, and Hartwig. That's an LLC to which I belong. The American Polygraph Association, for whom I'm the editor, and the American Association of Police Polygraphists, for whom I am the Research and Information Chair. And I want to just give a shout out to my dear friend, Dr. Charles Hans, who has been my friend for many years now, and who helped me prepare this material and was the one who actually came up with this concept of a survival analysis that we're going to use. And I found it to be one of the best ways to understand this stuff. And so I wanted to make sure that I recognized his contribution to actually coming up with that idea. And then finally, I'd like to, again, make another shout out to Drs. John Kircher and David Raskin, who've worked together for 40 plus years as I understand it. And through their collaborative efforts and contributions and hard work and friendship, they've been able to bring us these ideas and bring us these technologies. And it's my sincere feeling that without them and without their collaboration, we wouldn't have this. We wouldn't have these technologies, or certainly we would be way farther behind than we are now. So my thanks to these men and to their efforts, and thanks to the Converus folks who've allowed us to really take advantage of these multiple technologies, and who had the wisdom to move this thing forward and really, I believe, hopefully make the world a better place. Some of the presentation topics and goals that we'll have here today, we'll discuss this concept of multiple hurdles and successive hurdles and what they actually mean and entail in a hiring process and in a credibility assessment process. We're going to consider the benefits of implementing this successive hurdles program into the credibility assessment model and talk about who benefits. It's not just the employer or the prospective employer that benefits. I think you'll be surprised, that it's actually the truthful or innocent, and I'll use those words interchangeably, truthful and innocent, guilt and deceptive, and that's only because in the peer-reviewed literature on these credibility assessment tools, they actually use guilt and innocent, or guilty or innocent, as the true ground state. So if you hear me say guilt or innocent, that's the actual ground state. If I say pass test or fail test, that's the actual result of the technology that we've applied to the person. But you'll see that the innocent people ultimately benefit from this. And so if you were a person applying at an agency and you're an innocent person, you came to tell the truth and be honest with the agency, you are far better off working for or applying to, in that case, an agency that employs or uses these credibility assessment tools. And you're best off applying to an agency that uses multiple credibility assessment tools. And we're going to talk about something called the base rate phenomenon. Some people call it the base rate problem. That it's not a problem, it's just a phenomenon. It's a problem if you don't understand it, and it's a problem if you can't understand how it affects your overall test result. But it's not a problem in per se in the fact that it exists. It just exists. It is what it is, and we have to learn to deal with it. And what we're going to learn here is how we can use multiple technologies, alternative technologies like EyeDetect, to improve this base rate, improve the base rates of the people that we later go on and test with polygraph. And so we actually use one tool to help us somewhat fix a phenomenon, or make better a phenomenon, and make the ultimate outcome even better. So we'll talk a little bit about that today. The idea of multiple hurdles in a hiring process. Multiple hurdles are generally considered a battery of tests. So a bunch of things that you have to get through, a bunch of hurdles you have to jump over, each one of them, in order to get hired. Now, I worked for a large sheriff's office in Texas, and I worked in recruiting there, and so we have multiple hurdles along the way for someone to get hired. Usually they include such things as like an initial interview, and then perhaps some written and PT testing, physical agility testing, a background investigation, then some kind of a credibility assessment testing like polygraph, and now we have EyeDetect. Psychological assessments by psychologists to rule out psychopathology and rule out maybe personalities or aspects of personality that would be inconsistent with good performance in law enforcement, and maybe medical screening by a doctor, a medical professional, to make sure that the person has the requisite or doesn't have any medical conditions that would be counterindicated or would prevent them from performing the job well. But each step of the way, they have to pass each hurdle in order to continue on in the process. And usually in most multiple hurdles hiring processes, if you fail one, you're done. So we want to consider the time, effort, and expense of each hurdle for just a minute here. In the best model, one would think, each hurdle would get more progressively time-consuming and more expensive and more intrusive as we went along. Basically, from just a cost benefit analysis, as a consumer, as a business person, and that's what these agencies are in this case. They should start at the least expensive hurdle, and then each hurdle should become more and more expensive, because each step along the way you're filtering out more and more people, so you're spending less money than you would if you had conducted the more expensive hurdles on the early end of the hiring process. Successive hurdles is a little bit different. Okay, so Successive Hurdles the concept of it was introduced in 1955 by Doctors Meehl and Rosen. And what they tried to do is to help us understand the things called sensitivity, which is actually being able to detect what it is that you're searching for. Specificity, having a test that's specific to what you're testing for. In other words, being able to pass on the people that don't have what you're looking for. And the idea of base rates. And this idea of base rates is basically the idea of the prevalence of, we'll have a better definition of it in just a little bit, but how much of something is in the group of the folks that you're testing. So for example, if I'm testing a bunch of police applicants, how many of them are actually guilty of behaviors that we would consider to be disqualifying? And that would be the base rate of guilt in these folks here. In science and all psychometric testing, all tests have errors. There are no perfect tests. And so we want your best tests allow you to quantify those errors, or have some estimates of quantifying those errors, so that you as the end user, you the decision maker, can take the test result and make heads or tails of it and decide, okay, how much weight am I going to give this test result? And that would be based on, hopefully, on good estimates of sensitivities, specificities, and the base rates of the target behavior within the population that you're testing. And base rates can become really extreme. They could be really low. Like, let's say, for example, we're in the government and we're testing for spies. Hopefully, our trusted and hardworking government employees have very few, if any, spies among them. So the base rate of spies would be really low. Alternatively, let's say we were testing police applicants from recently graduated from college, police applicants on alcohol or drug experimentation. That base rate may be higher. So these base rates can become so low or so extreme that the test itself is meaningless. Or how about this? The test result is meaningless because it doesn't give us any more information than the base rate would have given us. But learning how to account for, manage, and take advantage of base rates, it helps us understand something called information gain. Information gain is what we get from the test result. It tells us, okay, what should we take away from this? When somebody says they passed a test or failed a test, what do we really take away from that? So let's look at some examples of some of the base rate phenomenon and see if we can wrap our heads around these ideas to help us better understand this stuff. Let's talk about the technologies first that we're going to be looking at in our base rate examples. The first one I'm going to introduce to you is EyeDetect, or sometimes known as Ocular-Motor detection of deception. And that's what it looks like, what you're looking at on your screen. There's a subject, a lady there taking the test. Her head is held steady by a chin rest. There is a way for her to answer either through a answering tool, basically a green and red button, yes and no button, or she can use the typical computer typing pad, and one letter may mean yes and one letter may mean no. We can do it that way too. You can see that she's looking at a screen and reading from a standard computer screen monitor. There's a camera that's filming everything that's going on there. It's filming her face sitting up on top of the computer monitor, much like there's a camera sitting on my monitor as I'm filming this for you all. There is an infrared sensor that is actually tracking her eyes and some of her eye behaviors. Very sensitive and very well built infrared eye scanner. And then there's something called a data locker that actually keeps and stores all the data. So that data locker is attached to that computer, and it can be detached from that computer and taken out to where there's an internet connection. So conceivably you could use this technology in a place that didn't allow internet. And then what you would do is you would take that data locker away with you where you could get an internet connection and then sync it up with the Converus cloud and have the test data analyzed. What the EyeDetect is looking at or looking for, just in a general sense, just in a kind of a broad sense, it's using changes in eye behavior, physiological changes like changes in pupil diameter and blink rates. It's looking at response behavior in terms of answering behaviors. How does a person respond to the questions on the test? And it's looking at things like reading behaviors. And it uses a number of different things, and then it has what's called a proprietary algorithm that measures many, many things, and then it takes these things and it assesses and gives a weighting to each one of these behaviors, and it compares the behaviors from one type of question to another. So that's kind of an overview of how it works. And then we have the polygraph, the Psychophysiological detection of deception polygraph. And the polygraph measures multiple bodily responses. So it measures different things like sweat gland activity and movement associated with pulmonary ventilation or breathing. It measures changes in blood pressure, so relative changes in blood pressure. It measures changes in the blood pulse volume in our subjects, so it measures a bunch of things. Poly meaning many, graph means many writings, and it's been around for many years, since the 1920s, and it's in screening applications where we're looking at applicant testing. The accuracies in the peer-reviewed literature show it to be around in the mid-80s. There's a confidence interval, a range of accuracies, but if you had to pick one kind of target number to give to somebody, about 85% is pretty good. Also, as it turns out, the EyeDetect accuracies for screening in the literature now and in the studies that have been done also seem to be about right around 85%. So that they are similar in being able to tell when someone's telling the truth and someone's lying. And there's a little bit of a trade-off, and we'll look at that. And one's a little better than one in one area, one's a little better than the other. And so we'll talk a little bit about that. The polygraph requires a skilled operator or a skilled person running it. It is not an easy school to make it through. I teach at a lot of different polygraph schools, and most law enforcement professionals and people that attend polygraph school find it a very challenging course. Right now the accredited courses are 400 hours minimum, and there's a lot of work that goes into it. And then once you're finished with the school, you come back, and if you're in what's called a licensing state, and there's about 20 some odd licensing states, you're going to have to spend time getting a license, and up to a year. And usually that's under the supervision of an already licensed, experienced examiner who meets certain criteria. So it's not a short, it's not a quick process to get through. And it is potentially perceived as intrusive. There exists something called the Employee Polygraph Protection Act that was instituted because of perceived intrusive testing that was done with the polygraph. And there are a lot of components that are placed on the person's body, and it sometimes is associated with criminal interrogation. Although the very vast majority of polygraph done in the United States is done in a screening setting, in a screening application, meaning that, for example, hiring of law enforcement or public safety officials, it still has, in some people's mind, that is associated. It is associated with a criminal interrogation. So that's the polygraph. So let's look at this base rate thing. The base rate is the incidence of something. It's how much of something we have in a population. And that could be anything of what is the base rate of lawyers in a population of people living in a town, or the base rate of teachers in a population of folks visiting Las Vegas. It just depends on how many teacher conventions there are, right? So, but it's often expressed as a percentage or a proportion, usually in one of those two ways. And it can affect the overall accuracy of a test. Now, when we say it can affect the overall accuracy of the test, that's when we weight if we're looking at the kind of errors we're going to make with both innocent and guilty people. Hey, so the base rates can have an effect on those kinds of things and the kinds of errors we make. So that's really what it means by that. And when they're really high, like if the base rates are really high, it's easy to make a decision. And so if I had 100 marbles in a bag, and 98 of those marbles were green marbles, and only 2 of those marbles were red marbles, and I told you, hey, I'll give you $10 if you can pull out a green marble, you'd have a pretty easy time winning a bunch of $10 bills off of me, right? Now, if I told you I'd give you $10 if you pull out a red marble, right, you're probably not going to win a whole lot of $10 off of me. And matter of fact, it's kind of interesting. We were just in Las Vegas, and there's a lot of beautiful buildings with a lot of lights and sounds and stuff like that. But ultimately, they make money there and keep the lights on in those buildings because the base rate of winners is going to be lower than the base rate of losers for people that are gambling there, and they can do that by adjusting the odds in the games. So most importantly, the biggest take-home point here is base rates affect the type of errors we make in testing. So here's an example I put together, and Dr. Hans and I put together for you. We have 1,000 applicants, all right? So we're going to be some big hiring agency. We have 1,000 applicants. 500 are innocent and 500 are guilty, and that's the true base rate, the true ground truth of their true existence in the world. We're going to take a test and say that this test is 90% accurate to make math easy. And then with equal base rates, when the base rates are equal, we can see that something at the very bottom called the outcome confidence. So the positive predictive value and the negative predictive value equal our base rates. Now let's just take a minute and unpack this particular table here for a second. What we had is 500 innocent and 500 guilty folks come in and take this test, whatever this test is. Well, 450 of the innocent pass the test and 50 fail, because remember, it's 90% accurate with innocent people and it's 90% accurate with guilty people. So 450 of the guilty fail and 50 of the guilty people actually pass. They beat the test, if you want to call it that. But overall, something called our positive predictive value. Positive means somebody failed a test, like you have a positive test outcome, like a positive screening test for, let's say you had a PPD placed for tuberculosis and it bubbled up. Well, that would mean you had a positive test result. So in our case here for our discussions, we're going to say if the test is positive, you failed the test. If the test is negative, you passed the test. Our negative predictive value, which is just a fancy way of saying how confident are we in the outcome of this test? How much confidence can I place in that test result? When that person says, when my tester says my subject passed the test, I'm 90% confident that they really are a innocent person. Now let's change things up for a minute here. I'm going to change the base rate. Remember my marbles? Instead of having 50 green marbles or 500 green marbles and 500 red marbles, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to only put about 100 red marbles and 900 green marbles. So I'm going to change the base rate. All right, I'm going to have only 1/10 of the marbles are actually going to be red marbles in this case. Now we'll use our same screening test that's 90% accurate with innocent folks and guilty folks. And so what I'm going to do is now let's look at what happens to our confidence in a pass test and our confidence in a failed test. So now I had, remember, 900 innocent people, right? 900 innocent people come and take the test. Well, as you can see, 810 of them are going to pass the test and 10 of them are actually going to fail the test. So now the great part about that is if you pass the test, my confidence in outcome is 99%. I am really sure if you pass this test, because the base rate's so high, if you pass this test, I'm really confident that you're an innocent person, that you're telling the truth. And that's good. That's a good thing. Now, alternatively, with this same test that's 90% accurate with my guilty people, it's just as accurate with the guilty people. The problem is I only brought 100 guilty people to the test. Well, of those 100 guilty people, okay, so of those 100 guilty people, let's do it this way. 90 will fail, right? And 10 of them will actually pass the test. So my overall number of people that fail the test, my positive predictive value, if you look at the raw numbers of folks who failed the test, half of those people were innocent and half of them were truthful. Meaning that my confidence in a failed test outcome is only 50%. Now, some may lament this finding, but it just depends on what I'm trying to do with this test. If I knew that my base rate, or I suspected that my base rate of guilt is really low, then I can take a a negative test result, a pass the test result. Somebody took the test and passed it. I can take great confidence in that, right? So I can say, hey, I know that the base rate of guilt is real low. I don't test a whole lot of people that have whatever this is. So if my person, my examinee, my test subject passes this test, I can feel really good about that. I can have almost about a 99% confidence that is a true test result, that is a truly innocent person that passed that test. All right, so it's just a matter of how what your objectives are. Let's look at some considerations here. The beauty is in the eyes of the beholder. You've heard that saying before, that depending on the base rate, right, and depending on what you're trying to do with this thing, with this test, extreme base rates can actually, as we said, not inform you of anything and can actually misinform you. So there's no such thing as a perfect test. There's not. Now, we can make thoughtful estimates of our base rates, and we can apply technologies to capitalize on what those base rates are. But we shouldn't feel bad about these, the fact that if we have a low base rate, half of the people who fail the test are probably truthful people. That's just a fact of life and testing. We just have to understand that ahead of time. Now, what we can do, though, is we can use multiple technologies to help us make better estimates of our confidence in the outcome. So if we think about what our testing goals are, we could actually adjust the base rates with using one technology, right? We can adjust the base rates of folks that are moving on to the second technology so that if we know what our testing goals are, we can have an extremely high level of confidence in our outcome. All right? So as I said, we just have to think ahead of time. Who are we trying to hire, and why are we trying to hire them? So let's look again at an example here. Let's say I'm hiring Secret Service agents that are going to stand next to the President of the United States or his children with loaded guns. Alternatively, I could be hiring FBI agents, right? And we want FBI agents or Secret Service agents. We want to be really sure that these people are highly credible and that they're what we would call innocent, that they're truly telling us the truth about not having any of this disqualifying behaviors. All right? Let's say, for example, in this example, that for every 10 positions that I have, or I have 100 applicants. So for every one job opening, I've got 10 people trying to get that job. So I'm willing to throw some babies out with the bathwater to make really sure that the person that I do hire I have the best chance that they are actually innocent or truthful about not committing any of this disqualifying behavior. So now what I can do is I can use these multiple technologies. I can use EyeDetect first as an initial screening. And if somebody passes this hurdle, right, I can then say, okay, now what I've done is I'm going to now make them jump through a second hurdle and do a polygraph test with them. And let's look at some numbers. What I'm doing is if I'm making them pass the first hurdle first with EyeDetect, and remember I said it's about 85% accurate with truthful and with innocent and guilty people. If I make them pass that hurdle, what I'm doing then is I'm taking my marbles, and let's just say I started with 50 green marbles and 50 red marbles. I do EyeDetect, and now I'm left with 85 green marbles and only 15 red marbles that move on to polygraph. So I raise the base rate of the truthful people that move on to the polygraph test. And let's see what happens when I do that. There is an alternative way of doing this too. I can if I want to be really sure about my applicant, if I want to make sure that I'm being fair to this applicant and I'm not just throwing them out of the hiring process because they failed a credibility assessment tool. If they fail the EyeDetect, then I can move them on to polygraph. And what I'm doing there is I'm making more red marbles that move on to polygraph, and then I'm increasing the base rate of deceptive people that move on to polygraph, thereby making the confidence in the outcome of the polygraph for when somebody fails it after failing EyeDetect, my confidence is really high. So, and let's look at some real numbers because I think that helps us wrap our head around it. We have to start with some estimate of how good each technology is at what we call sensitivity, identifying when someone's lying, and specificity would be identifying when someone is telling the truth. So I'm going to use some numbers from Dr. David Raskin's presentation at the American Polygraph Association's 2015 seminar in Chicago, Illinois. And Dr. Raskin is one of the preeminent researchers in this area, if not the most well-known researcher. So I trust his numbers implicitly. And so the numbers I'm going to use here for EyeDetect are that if somebody is innocent, that the EyeDetect will truly pass them. They'll pass the innocent people about 88% of the time. And if they're guilty, it will catch them lying about 83% of the time. And then, so what we do then is we just say, okay, so that what we say the true negatives, right? A negative test result is somebody passing the test. The true negatives is about 88% for EyeDetect. That means that the false negatives, that means the people that pass the test that shouldn't have, the bad guys, if you will, the liars, the guilty people who pass the test, we have about a 17% false negative rate. And on the other side, for the guilty people, we catch about 83% of the liars, and we unfortunately call about 12% of the truthful people liars also. For polygraph, which is what you see, PDD, Psychophysiological Detection of Deception, it's a little bit different. The innocent people, the truly innocent people, will about 83% will pass the test. The truly guilty people, about 91% will fail the test. So those are our numbers we're going to use, and they're well-established numbers, and I trust them, and there's research to support those numbers. Now, any individual study may have a different number here or there, but those are kind of average numbers, putting a bunch of studies together that Dr. Raskin presented. Okay, so here we go, stage 1. Now, we're going to look what happens when we take equal base rates. We don't know what the base rate is, so we've got 50 green marbles and 50 red marbles, and we don't know what the base rates are, so we're going to assume for this exercise here, starting off, I have a 50-50 base rate. Okay, and I'm going to use EyeDetect as my first hurdle because it's a lot faster and it's simpler to do. It'll only take me about 30 minutes to do this, and I can use the EyeDetect to screen a whole bunch of folks and then decide what I'm going to do with that test result. So here I took 1,000 people with 500 were truly innocent and 500 were truly guilty of disqualifying behaviors. And then we can look and see at the bottom line is, what is my confidence in the outcome? And as you can see that if I'm going to look at, okay, when somebody took the EyeDetect with a 50-50 base rate, given what we know the EyeDetect's accuracies are, their sensitivity and specificity with the numbers Dr. Raskin gave us, if I assume those things, at the end of the testing, I have what's called an outcome confidence for passing the test of 84% and an outcome confidence for failing the test of 87%. What that means is I can be about 84% sure that the people that pass this test are really innocent people, and I can be about 87% sure that the folks who failed this test are actually guilty or liars. Now I decide what I'm going to do next is my second hurdle. Am I hiring Secret Service agents? Am I going to move to what's called a conservative model of testing because I want to be really, really sure about the ultimate test result, right? Maybe in my case, 84% sure that they're truthful or that they're innocent is not good enough to give them a gun and have them stand next to the president's kids, all right? So I want to be really sure. So I might go to what's called a conservative model, and let's look and see what happens. In this conservative successive hurdles model, the 475 folks who failed the EyeDetect are done. We're not going to look at them anymore. They're eliminated from consideration for the time being or permanently, depending on how you set up your program. Only those 525 people who passed the EyeDetect, right, who passed the EyeDetect move on. Now, remember what we said is we went from 50-50 green and red marbles to 84 green marbles and 16 basically red marbles. So in terms of the kinds of base rates that we're looking at here. So now let's run the polygraph next, and we'll use the polygraph numbers from Dr. Raskin's presentation, and we'll subject these 525 people to this second stage, this second hurdle of testing, and look at our confidence in a negative outcome. And when somebody passes this test, the confidence in outcome is 98%. All right, so we can be 98% sure that somebody who passed the polygraph after passing the EyeDetect is truly an innocent person telling the truth about the disqualifying behaviors. Let's think through these results for a second together. We began with 50 guilty and 50 innocent folks. After 2 screenings, 365 innocent and 8 guilty passed the polygraph ultimately. So that's who gets to move forward in the hiring process and maybe in the backgrounding process or whatever process that we're looking at. So there was a 98% reduction in guilty people by using these 2 tools. So we were able to reduce that down to 98%. Now, granted, we had a little bit of cost to bear in this. We said that we were willing to throw some babies out with the bathwater. We lost 135 of our 500 innocent folks who started the process. About a 27% reduction were eliminated in the process. But going back to the beginning, there is no perfect answer to this. Because there are no perfect tests, there's no perfect solutions. But a more perfect solution or a better solution is using one technology to adjust the base rates of a second technology to achieve the hiring goals. So by using EyeDetect, what we did is we adjusted the base rate of truthful people, of innocent people that moved on to the polygraph test so we could capitalize on the base rate, changing the base rates. So kind of another way to look at this, if you came into this, if you were hiring on in this agency or trying to get hired on, and you were an innocent person, your likelihood of surviving this dual screening process is about 73%. And that's not bad. All right. Now, if you started as a guilty person, as a liar, right, lying or hiding or withholding disqualifying behavior, the likelihood of you surviving these 2 screening processes is about 2. And that's pretty darn low. That's a really thoughtful way of using these technologies to get to what we want to get to. Remember, we're talking about a person who's going to be an FBI agent or a Secret Service agent, and for whom these positions have multiple people that want to apply for them. So, there are you have to think these things through about what your goals are. And so I'm going to reverse the process. Let's say we're going to take what I call a liberal approach and be more liberal about our decision-making processes. And we want to be really fair to our applicants here. So I'm going to reverse the process. All right? We're only going to test the folks who fail the EyeDetect with the polygraph test. In other words, we'll run the screening test with EyeDetect first. And if you pass EyeDetect, you make it through the credibility assessment hurdle and you move on in the hiring process. If you fail the EyeDetect, then we're going to move those people on to a second round of testing for credibility assessment with the polygraph. So what we're going to do, it reduces the base rate of the innocent folks that are tested with the polygraph in the end. We're increasing the base rate of the guilty people who move on to take the polygraph testing. So this is where we would be concerned or more concerned with what are called false positive outcomes, meaning innocent people failing the test. So once again, we have to start somewhere. So let's take 500 green marbles and 500 red marbles, 500 innocent, 500 guilty folks, and we'll subject them to the EyeDetect first. Same numbers for EyeDetect. You can see that we come out with a 87% confidence in those folks failing the test. So basically, if we do this test and someone fails the EyeDetect, we can be about 87% confident that they're a guilty person. So that what that means is we change the base rate of those people moving on to the polygraph test. So we're going to say, okay, 87% confident is not enough to take you out of consideration for the job. We're going to have another test called polygraph here. So what we're doing is we're changing the base rates of guilty people. Now we're going to have 87 red marbles and 13 green marbles going on to the polygraph testing. So now what we're going to do, the 475 who fail the EyeDetect would not be eliminated in this case, right? They would move on and get the polygraph test. And we said our new base rate of guilt is 87%. Now what we're interested in is let's take a look at the confidence and outcome for someone who failed the polygraph test after failing the EyeDetect. And you can see from this table that the confidence and outcome is 97%. I can be confident that if somebody fails the polygraph after failing EyeDetect, that there's a 95% chance that they came from the deceptive or the guilty group of applicants. How about that? Let's think through the results again together. We began with 500 and 500. After 2 rounds of screening, we're left with 378 guilty and only 10 innocent who failed a polygraph test, which is our second hurdle of the Successive Hurdles model. 86% of the innocent people survived. And we had a 97% reduction in guilty people making it on further on in the process. Now, we lost 70 innocent folks along the way, but that's the cost of doing business with imperfect testing. It's better than if we had just stopped at one level, at one hurdle, if we're trying to be really fair with people. Once again, by using EyeDetect, we adjusted or raised up the base rate of guilty applicants moving on to polygraph, and we can see this improves what's called the positive predictive value, which is the confidence and outcome of a failed test on the polygraph. And we did that by changing the base rates. So another way to look at this is if we began as an innocent person, you've still got about an 86% chance of making it through. If you started it as a guilty person, your chances of making it through are about 3%. Now, think for a second here. If you were an innocent person applying at an agency that used this type of a dual hurdle or successive hurdles credibility assessment technology. Now, you're an innocent person. Your chances of making it through are 86%. If they didn't use any technology, if they just talked to you and interviewed you, we know from many meta-analyses that the human unassisted lie detector is about as good at chance as determining when someone is telling the truth and someone is lying. We're as good as basically flipping a coin. So if you were an innocent person trying to make it through, you only have a 50-50 chance of getting hired because the person who's interviewing you is only 50-50 good at telling when someone's telling the truth and when someone's lying. Actually, the number is about 54%. So got a little bit better chance, but not much better than flipping a coin. Now, instead, you apply to an agency that uses something like this, right? You apply to an agency that uses a successive hurdles model and first tests with like EyeDetect and then moves on and tests with polygraph for those who failed the test. Now your chances went from 50% or 54% to 86% if you're an innocent person, if you're telling the truth. So you are much better off finding places that use these technologies thoughtfully and applying there if you're an innocent person. Now, if you're a guilty guy or guilty woman or guilty person who's lying, go to a place who doesn't use these because you've got a 54% chance of making it through anyway. Right? You don't want to go to somewhere that's doing this because if you began the process as a guilty person, your chances of surviving, your survival likelihood is about 3% in this case. Whereas if you go to a place that doesn't use this, your survival likelihood's about 50%. So 54% actually or so, somewhere around in there depending on whose numbers you use. But you got a much better chance if you're a guilty guy going somewhere they don't use these tools. So just think about that for a second. It's kind of an interesting thought. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me. My name is Mark Handler. That's MarkHandler. You can reach me through Converus. You can reach me through the American Polygraph Association's website. You can reach me on my email. It's polygraphmark, POLYGRAPHMARK @gmail.com. And I hope you found this discussion helpful. Some of the ideas, like I said, they're a little esoteric and kind of hard to wrap your head around. But ultimately, and the take-home message is this: no test is perfect. Okay? No credibility assessment test is perfect. We don't necessarily know the base rates of guilt for the folks that we're testing, though we could probably make reasonable estimates of them, and we could probably go back and look in some of our databases and find good estimates for them. But because of base rates and because of imperfect testing, our outcome, our confidence and outcome is always going to be subjected to something to basically the base rate phenomenon. So the base rate phenomenon can have a profound effect on the kinds of errors we make. So the thoughtful adjudicator, or the thoughtful person who's in a position to hire, or the thoughtful screener would think ahead of time, who am I trying to hire? Why am I trying to hire them? What tools are available to me? What steps of the hiring process in the multiple hiring, the multiple hurdles process, what steps am I going to employ? In what steps am I going to employ these credibility assessment tools? How am I going to use credibility assessment tools? And using them to change the base rates of subsequent testing can improve your outcome, your confidence in outcome. So again, thank you for taking the time to listen to this. I hope I was helpful.